It's really getting annoying, but Donald Trump's latest statements are causing the markets to sell off again, and we're seeing a mini crash. Donald Trump is making new statements about tariffs, and this time they also affect the EU. We really need to take a close look at what he said this time. It really looks like the trade war isn't going to end anytime soon, but rather that this is going to drag on for a while. Just as I'm putting this video together, there's even a breaking news alert coming in, and it's about the trade war in the U.S. And now it's even threatening to escalate worldwide. Here, Donald Trump says that the US doesn't have free trade, but rather stupid trade. The whole world is ripping us off, and Donald Trump is really pissed off about it. We're seeing massive volatility. This morning, I'm making another video. Hey, Donald Trump says he wants to pump the markets up. As a result, the Bitcoin price went up initially, along with the entire financial markets. Now he's making a new statement about tariffs that are coming to Europe, and the market is selling off again. As I said, not massive, it also looks like the impacts are getting lower and lower here. That means Donald Trump, the panic he's spreading, is becoming less and less. That means he can influence the markets less and less because people probably just don't want to deal with it anymore. It's all this back and forth. One day he says, hey, everything's great, it's going up. The next day he says, hey, we're putting tariffs back in place, and then the market goes down again. The next day he says, oh, okay, we're lifting the tariffs, and then the market goes back up. We're really seeing this game play out every single day. And in the morning, the market situation can be completely different. I also have a very, very exciting assessment from Andreas Beck, who explains this very, very well. What is going on here and why the economy is being deliberately driven into the wall, why uncertainty is potentially being deliberately stoked here, and why this volatility can now be very, very dangerous for anyone who's not properly prepared and lets themselves get panicked. Because in the long term, nothing will change about Bitcoin. So everything that's happening here is just short-term background noise. And that's just really, really important to keep in mind. Additionally, we now have new inflation data that doesn't look too bad. And then we have a massive investment like this. It seems like the Trump family is now indirectly looking to invest in Bitcoin. And we're going to kick things off with the inflation numbers. Because good inflation numbers could potentially be good here, since this should bring Donald Trump's goal closer, which is to get the central banks in the US to lower interest rates. He's also creating all this panic to provoke the interest rates, hoping the US central bank will lower them. I mean, long-term interest rates are already going down, the 10-year rates, but Donald Trump can't directly influence short-term rates. He can only do it indirectly by spreading panic and chaos in the market. So that means now here, the producer price inflation in February drops to 3.2%, which is below the expectations of 3.3%. That's already a positive sign. Then here, the core inflation of the producer price index fell to 3.4%, which is also below the expectations of 3.6%. Both the consumer price index and the producer price index inflation were stronger than expected in February. So everything is cooling off again. Inflation is declining on all fronts. Now, people have actually written in like, hey, why are you even reading the data out loud? It's all manipulated anyway. Yeah, I get that. Of course, it's all manipulated. But the central banks still base their decisions on these manipulated numbers. If these manipulated numbers are too high, then they won't lower the interest rates. And when these manipulated numbers are low, then they'll lower the interest rates, even if it's an absurd game. But we can take a look at that in another video, how the inflation data is manipulated, from start to finish, through basket manipulation and other things. And then we see here that Bitcoin has been sold off by about 2,000 to 3,000 US dollars here due to the news from Donald Trump. We also see here the S&P 500. The futures initially sold off when Donald Trump made that statement. Regarding the tariffs, so before the markets in the US sold off, before the markets opened in the US, the futures markets went down first. That's also really important to keep in mind. It's not just that, because now a lot of people are saying Bitcoin is so dependent on politics. It's not just Bitcoin that's dependent on politics. It's the entire overall markets that are currently dependent from Donald Trump. Sure, the S&P 500 doesn't react as strongly to all the statements here because there's simply a much, much higher market capitalization in the background. Bitcoin has a much, much lower market capitalization. That means if the S&P 500 goes down by 1%, Bitcoin could drop by 5, 6, 7% or something like that. So we have a certain correlation here, and Bitcoin is just here. Let's just say it's more strongly influenced by such statements because the market capitalization is low. But that doesn't mean that only Bitcoin is influenced. It's not just from politics, from all the trade wars and so on, but the entire overall markets are influenced. We're seeing it too, all the tech stocks and everything, they're really getting crushed. We're really in a risk-off sentiment right now, where people are shifting from risky to safer investments like bonds and stuff. And that's also the reason why the 10-year government bonds are going down. Because Donald Trump is creating uncertainty here. Because of the uncertainty, people are moving into government bonds. When more people buy government bonds, the interest rates go down. And so, Donald Trump can somewhat correlate the 10-year yield curve by spreading panic here. We then see the statement that led them to initially sell off the markets. Trump is threatening a 200% tariff on French champagne and other EU spirits. So he's going straight after the EU. The US tariff follows the European Union's decision to reintroduce an import tax on American whiskey. So these are also counter-tariffs here. That means the U.S. is firing shots at the EU is firing back at the US, and now the U.S. is shooting at the EU again. The US is still planning to announce an additional round of so-called reciprocity tariffs in April, which are counter-tariffs. European countries are also expected to be affected by these measures, and Donald Trump has already announced that he has no problem raising the tariffs back up at any time. It was also said that Trade Minister Howard Lutnick mentioned on Bloomberg television on Thursday that Trump is totally upset about the EU's actions, which led to this new threat. So we're seeing that this is just a threat for now. It hasn't happened yet. And if it happens, then the markets might sell off again. And that's the massive game that's going on in the background. I mean, some say what Donald Trump is doing is genius. It's the best strategic move you could ever make. Instill uncertainty in the markets. Bring down inflation. Push people into government bonds. Then take advantage of all the panic, maybe even buy low. And then, when the whole situation is somewhat settled, then you can pump the markets back up. Then they also got the central banks in the meantime to lower interest rates and so on. So, this could really be the coolest chess move in the world. But it could also go massively wrong. And we'll take a look at that right now. Andreas Beck, who actually has a massive warning about how Donald Trump's game could really go very, very wrong, because it's definitely a game with fire that he's playing here. That has to be said very clearly. Howard Lutnick, the trade minister, also said that Donald Trump won't be disrespected here, and Trump will always respond bigger and stronger, he adds. That means you really can't play games with Donald Trump because he's currently in the stronger position. And when games are played here, Donald Trump's ego takes over, and then he just hits back even harder. And that's the issue right now, where maybe a lot of people or many countries haven't really adjusted to that yet. But I don't know what the right decision is here. Do you give in here, or should I say, yeah? Are they trying to bluff their way through this? Then the trade war just keeps dragging on. And then there was an interesting report here. According to the Wall Street Journal, the Trump family has been negotiating a stake in the cryptocurrency exchange Binance. At the same time, the Wall Street Journal reported that Trump was pressured for a pardon. So that's interesting. Here, Binance has now also, I think they're cooperating with some Saudis or not Saudis from Abu Dhabi. Some of them, I believe, are even from the Wealth Fund, or some people from the oil states or something like that who have also massively invested in Binance. And the Trump family is planning something similar. And I also said at the beginning, this is an indirect Bitcoin investment. Of course, Binance is a huge shitcoin operation. They have other cryptocurrencies and so on. But we know by now that these crypto exchanges, Binance, Coinbase, and so on, are nothing more than what you see with MicroStrategy. They're kind of derivatives on Bitcoin. That means if Bitcoin goes up, Coinbase goes up, Binance goes up, MicroStrategy goes up. When Bitcoin goes down, Coinbase, Binance, MicroStrategy, and so on go down. So that means we also have an indirect potential investment. Now the Trump family is getting into Bitcoin. And I mean, this would fit better than ever. Now they're bringing the markets down and then they invest here. Although you also have to say that the World Liberty story is that they are now massively in the red because they actually bought at very high prices. Now everything is crashing here. So you can't really say that there's been massive insider trading going on here because they've actually crashed their own portfolio down. But now, please take in this mega assessment from Andreas Beck, who really wraps everything up here, who goes into the whole tariff situation and also brings up some interesting points that haven't really been considered before. And I found that an interesting outlook here on Donald Trump and the trade war, and how everything is going to continue from here and how it could potentially end.
You just have to wait it out. So as it's been decided, all the demands that are out there. And so you just don't do anything. The exact same thing is happening now in the U.S. Are there tariffs now? Aren't there tariffs? Invest there. Am I investing here? Do I think I can still export to China or what? Okay, then we just won't do anything for now.
That also affects the consumer. Also, you might be worried about your job or, you can really see that, especially in the opinion polls. And you can already see that in the indicators. You shouldn't overrate it, but there's a lot of uncertainty right now.
Exactly. Now it's in America. They don't have those social systems like we do here. Unemployment has a completely different social significance there. That's why. Consumers are like, oh, we don't know what's coming next. Well, then we'll just hold back for now. You can already see that in various indicators. And that's Trump, because this kind of unpredictability, that's like poison for economic planning. Now there are basically two camps in the U.S. Some say, the American voter is driven by economic self-responsibility. And when the economy is doing poorly, he doesn't find that funny. And then the Republicans are also jumping ship on Trump. So the talks about a Trump put, that he has to counteract. And the others say, obviously, he wants to go through with it because Trump himself no longer says in his rhetoric that what he is doing is directly good for the stock market, but rather he says, yes, that will come later because I have already received high investment commitments from companies within because of the tariffs. And then it takes time. So he's already changed his rhetoric on that.
I think that's what worries a lot of people, right? Because with Trump, you always had the feeling that, yeah, he talks a lot and he says something different every day, but then he realizes, okay, that's not going over well. But now it feels like he doesn't care about what you just described. And I think that's something we haven't really seen before. So according to the motto, always, oh yes, he talks a lot, but he'll get it together. And now, for the first time, I feel so afraid inside. Like, maybe he's really going to drive the whole thing into the ground.
Yeah. So maybe just a note on that. I had to learn that myself too. We live in a system where it's always assumed that prosperity is the be-all and end-all for a democratic society because in the end, everyone wants to live well. And prosperity means a functioning economy. That means no matter who comes into power, whether I'm hanging in the shop window or not, every government has the primary goal of ensuring the economy is doing well because everything else comes after that. But that's actually not a law of nature. So that surprised a lot of people. For example, in Russia, how brutal. That will be turned around. It's not politics that serves the economy, but rather the economy that serves the power ambitions of political players.
War economy.
No, it doesn't go into a war economy or even in China. Now, the market there too is tipping over. Xi Jinping has turned that around. The task of the Communist Party is no longer to promote the economy well, but those who, they are, tens of CEOs have disappeared.
Yeah, for sure, that completely wrecked the market. Now it's slowly getting back on track, but that completely destroyed the stock market.
Yeah, because they haven't understood that their main goal has to be to strengthen the Communist Party and its policies. I get the impression that this is something. Well, we always look at it and think, okay, Trump will back down or Elon Musk will back down. So Elon Musk hasn't, I have to consider how the Tesla stock is being adjusted. It has collapsed. So Elon Musk, just to remind you, bought Twitter for $44 billion.
Yeah, that could be right, the exact amount, but it could be like this.
Let's say it was quite a bit.
30, 40 billion, I guess, yeah.
He financed a lot through debt. The loans are maturing. Now, last week, about 4.5 billion or so matured. He has to pay 11% interest now during the refinancing. So he really needs to, well, you have to say, okay, he has to deal with Donald Trump sit down and say, maybe we shouldn't mess things up with the whole world, and maybe we should bring back some predictability to our actions.
But do you really think someone like Elon Musk cares about 11, 10, 9% interest or a billion? Maybe that's what the markets are noticing right now, so to speak. They're on a bigger mission. That's maybe exactly what you just explained.
You always think, yeah, Elon Musk wants to get into politics to sell more Teslas.
Exactly. That's how it was framed, so he can sell more Teslas.
And that's not a law of nature. There are actually companies that are set up differently. The economy only serves political power, and there's plenty of money anyway. Yeah. From that perspective, I don't want to make any assumptions, and I don't want to say that they're on the path to a totalitarian state. But as an investor, I had to learn that. For example, in China, political actions were made that have so obviously harmed the Chinese economy and the building of prosperity in China that I would have thought it was impossible before.
Well, I found that interesting. That's an ultra-interesting assessment. He also says quite clearly, hey, he sees Trump as the trigger for the volatility in the markets, for the sell-off in the markets. And as long as this trade war doesn't settle down, that's not going to change. And what was really, really interesting was the aspect where he says, hey, it doesn't necessarily have to be that they're acting rationally and that they're just trying to pump up their bags. They might not just be trying to pump up their bags, but it could really be heading towards a totalitarian state, where they simply prioritize power above all else. And that you also, let's say, I don't just look at my own backs, but just hear, let's say, things that might be really, really hard for a lot of people to understand. And then he gives other examples here with China or with Russia, or whatever, where there were also some really, really irrational decisions. There are always irrational decisions, but right now it's very, very unpredictable. and we definitely have a very uncertain future ahead of us. I've already said it, Donald Trump is playing with fire here. Feel free to let me know in the comments what you think about Andreas Beck's assessment, what you generally think about the volatility in the market, and how you see the situation. If you still want to buy Bitcoin, I'll put a link down below for you. 21 Bitcoin, how you can easily, safely, and simply buy Bitcoin. Here, with the code, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. Suitable for beginners, advanced users, and pros. Here, there are a ton of super cool tools like auto wallet, transfer, savings plans, and so on. So definitely check it out. See you later, folks. Peace out.